Good afternoon, Allan Hunter. How are you?
It's delightful to see you, Lulu.
Same here, and I'm very happy to be talking today about how we can write our memoirs, how we can go beyond our ego to write memoirs, to really tap in this infinite wisdom that we have. And you just wrote a book to help people do that. You have over 30 years of actually teaching people how to do it, and this is not your first book. We spoke of many other ones before,
Indeed.
but you're gonna give us a few tips. Can you show us the cover? Because I know it's come out in a few days.
Here it is. This is the cover. I hope you can see that.
Yeah,
It's
cool.
it's called Write Your Memoir, and it's then called the soul work
The
of
big
telling your
keyword.
story.
That's
And
the
I
big
think the
keyword.
soul work is important. It's not just a story, it's what comes from deep within. So
Mm.
that's the title and that's the book.
Happen. So we're in this new space of it's pouring, it's
Mm-hmm.
coming, it's a
Coming.
new story even comes out of the
New
story
story.
you lived.
Exactly. It's my students, many of whom have been with me for quite a while, say, I wasn't intending to write about this, but this is what came out. I didn't think I could write, but here it is. It's the story telling you how it needs to be told. And that's the difference. It's not the writer writing a story, that's ego. It's the story telling the writer how the story needs to emerge so the real wisdom can be found, the
Mm.
real depth. And that, you see, is what most of us don't allow any time for, not even 15 minutes a day. It's a practice, like anything else. So that's at the heart of this book, and there are many other exercises that build in the same way.
So it's the soul that is guiding you and that is helping you write really
Yes.
what really happened. But
It's
it's
the
hard
deep.
to really remove yourself from this process.
uh,
It's
well, that's it. It's hard to. Uh, One person turned up in one of my classes and he said, I want to prove that my sister-in-law drove my brother to suicide. And I thought, whoa, you've already come to a conclusion before you've looked at the evidence. And as he was working, what he discovered was that the sister-in-law might not have been a very helpful figure, but she didn't hand the loaded gun or the knife to this person. There was a bigger picture in which the writer himself had a responsibility
uh-huh,
that he didn't want to admit. And when he recognized that, he was able to do that soul work that we're talking about and say, what is my responsibility to others? How can I learn from this? What is the deep story? So that's what I do.
that seems very therapeutic to do, and even for people not wanting to publish it, I guess.
Yes. Well, again, whether one publishes it or not is up to the individual. Some people say, oh, I'm just very happy to have got to this place of understanding, even if I only print off 3 copies and show it to my family. Other people say, no, this is something I want to publish because the wisdom is too good and too important to waste. And that might be someone who's been through a more traumatic um, lifetime. And all sorts of trauma is out there, are plenty. Children of alcoholics, victims of incest and abuse, and some of these stories need to be understood by the individual and by us as readers, so we can see our fellow human beings in a more compassionate way.
So it's a bit more work. Like some people write a journal, so that would be day to day. So the
Yeah.
memoir, should the person go back to their journal? Because the memoir is in retrospect. So how do you get started with all this? And how is it different from a journal?
Oh, well, see, the trouble with the journal is that it's almost always coming from a point of ego, at least to begin with. This is what I did today.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very good way for recording the events of the day, but I like to think a journal is, for many people, only a first step. What is really useful is to go back a couple of years later and you open the book. Whoa, did I really think that? Well, yeah, I did actually. I've chosen to blank it out, but here it is. This is what I thought. what can I learn from that? Was it true? Was it me being self-dramatizing? Was I reacting too much? And often the response is yes, 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 because it was my journal. So really journaling is not the answer, although it is a very, very useful first step. Some people think, oh, I've written a journal, that's all there is. No, no, we have to go back to that ore body and mine the gold and refine the gold to get what's really important.
So is it coming from a space of looking back at our life with gratitude so that then the wisdom starts pouring?
Precisely so. All the people I've worked with who have stayed with the memoir writing, all of them have been able to look back at their lives to express gratitude and love and compassion. And actually, as I say, it has brought some very difficult aspects of life and some very hurt people to a place of peace. Maybe for the first time, in one case, I can think of a man who was at peace with his memories for the first time in 65 years. These were things that would wake him up in the middle of the night screaming. And by writing it out, he would come to an understanding that really allowed him to face the next portion of his life in a wholly different way. I've also done some of these exercises. I started, as the book will tell you, with people who are in prison, offenders. And you know, occasionally that has been dramatic, as they've said, wow, I didn't realize how I was thinking and what I was doing. How could I have done that? And that's a huge step towards changing who one is and living more peacefully, more lovingly, more compassionate, living from the heart rather than from the ego. And so that's the center of this book.
You should definitely distribute it in prisons. I can see the plus you have time, especially in that setup. But we should do it in our lives too.
We should. I think everybody
to step back and even at different parts of our lives, it seems. And to close a chapter, to write a new book, it's kind of life. I often see life as books, you know, new chapters that we turn and we close. It's a bit like that, I guess.
That's exactly it. Because we can't really open the new chapter until we've understood the old one. Many people sort of walk away from a marriage or a romance or a job or what, and they say, oh, that was... But until it's been processed, you're still stuck there. You've just changed the scenery, you've rearranged the chairs, but it's still the same thing, you know, and gosh, I've done that, but this is a much better way forward.
So what's your tip for the person that know themselves as not good writers and they could have a block just thinking of that?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Blocks always come from the ego. A writing block is, oh, it's somebody saying, I'm no good at this, I can't do this. And again, the idea is to bypass the ego. And sometimes I get people to write letters to their ego. I say, you know, so why does it have to be any good? And when they do that, often they will find this voice that says, you can't write, and you don't know what you're talking about. Often people say, after a little while, they say, wait a second, that sounds awfully like my grandma. That voice sounds awfully like my third grade teacher. And suddenly, that's the real story. You've got to go back to that time and have a little conversation with grandma or the third grade teacher or Uncle Fred and say, you know what? You were afraid of something. You didn't want me to express myself. Why were you afraid? Were you afraid that I would say things about how mean you were? And that's the story that behind every block is a story that really wants to be told. Most people give up. It's like finding the oasis in the middle of the desert and then saying, oh, I don't like the look of this oasis. No, you sample the water.
Yeah. That's where the juice is. Yeah, I can see that.
Where the juice is, yep.
That's how we protect ourselves, don't we?
Yes, we protect ourselves by knowing less than we really know. We protect ourselves by blaming other people, by making them the problem, and not realizing that if we were there, we were part of the problem too. And that's what the ego does to make us feel safe, so we can go to sleep at night. Well, unfortunately, it's a short-term strategy, not a long-term strategy. It's like, the ego is the sort of thing that when those lights come on the dashboard of your car that say, problem, problem, the ego is the one that puts a piece of sticking tape over it and says, okay, it's really not a problem. Well, it only works for a short amount of time, and then the problem demands to be taken care of.
And is it a different process than when you're writing a story where people say, I'm guided actually by the story?
Well, I think that's very much the same thing. When the story takes over, and many fiction writers say, wow, this character, this story just took me somewhere. That is another way that the unconscious wisdom is saying, look, this is what I want to explore. Let's go there. Let's go there even if it feels odd to do it. And again, that's the split between the ego and the heart. And the heart knows what it wants to say. Always, I say to my writers, go where the energy is. If your heart is saying, I want to write, then write that first. Don't wait. Don't put it off. Go with it straight away. So this is what I call listening to oneself, listening to one's own wisdom. And really, that's the only place that any writing that is worth reading ever comes from. If you know all the answers before you start your memoir or your story, then guess what? There are no surprises for you, and if there are no surprises for you as the writer, there are no surprises for the reader. It's all basically predictable. Life is not predictable. The riches of life surprise us at every corner if we're prepared to pay attention to it.
So the heart opens up, and then there's some emotions that come. I guess there's some honesty. Is that part of the memoir, that sadness that comes up, and should that be written as well? The heart expressing it hurts.
Oh yes. So sometimes people say, this is difficult for me to write. And I'll say, okay, that lets you know you're dealing with real things as opposed to second-hand, second-rate things. And sometimes I'll say to people, you might not be ready to write about this yet. Make notes, put it on one, and come back to it when you feel you're ready. Now what that does is it signals to the unconscious, it signals, I know there's something there, I'm not ready, but I will be ready for it. And the story will, as it were, sit in the heart until the individual is ready to get back there. It doesn't go away, it doesn't get forgotten.
So it's really a soul work. That's why you call it a soul work. You're actually digging or jumping into this sea of your soul. I mean, your soul's life, your soul's plan, your soul's journey.
Right, precisely so. And we forget, we don't forget, but we put aside all of those usual thoughts about looking good and saying the right thing and not offending anybody. Many of my writers say, well, I can't write that, my mother wouldn't like it. And I say, is your mother still alive? Oh no, my mother's... But the power of that person is still there. And I say, gosh, if you're afraid you're going to offend someone, that probably means this is something that needs to be said that hasn't been said. The ego has stopped the heart from expressing itself. And that is the center of most people's misery. They have something to say, but they feel in the ego, in the outside world, they feel that it's not possible to say it. And that is one of the great stressors and one of the great heartbreakers of our time.
This is great to have that as a tool to heal ourselves and to move forward with our life and be at peace.
That's why I do it. It is a way of healing ourselves, although of course sometimes it's not healing in the sense of it happens immediately. It takes time. And really it does move people to a place of greater understanding and peace so that they can let go of the woundedness that they might otherwise hold on to. If you come to a place of peace, you discover that that is really who you are. And so if part of your previous identity has been as a victim, look what they did to me, ouch. When you're in a place of peace, you don't need that identity anymore, that hurt identity. And that allows joy to come back into life.
Would you have a last message for people listening to leave us with?
Oh, yes, I do. And that is that memoir writing, we tend to think of it as something that only famous people are allowed to do. Only personalities and TV shows, celebrities of that sort, they're the only people who are allowed to do it. I would like to say, no, it's what all of us really should feel free to do for ourselves, as a gift for ourselves. You can learn more from you than you can by reading the works of some famous TV star who maybe has had it ghostwritten by somebody else. You know, Sarah Palin has just released her whatever it is, I suppose it's a memoir, and it's all been ghostwritten by someone else. And she's using it to get revenge on her political opponents. You know, that's fine, but that's all coming from the ego. Where's the soul work? Where is the deep work where she says, you know, what is this all about? Can I create more peace rather than more conflict? And so memoir is for everybody. And it doesn't matter what age you are. You don't have to be 60, 70 or whatever. I have memoir writers who have started at the age of 22 and 23. And it takes them to their personal wisdom so the next phase of life can unfold. If this is what you want, a better next phase of life, I can't think of a better way to go about it.
Cool. Yeah, no, that's very, very exciting. It makes me want to go and write and start the process, because it seems to be a process, and
yeah.
And then it seems like you're hurting. You arrive to a point, and then you need to stop and digest it in your heart, and then continue. And so it's a journey. Well, thank you, Allan, so much for...
Thank you, Lulu. It's always such a pleasure to be with you and to talk.
Same for me. Same for me. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope you can see that.
Yeah, cool.
It's called Write Your Memoir, and it's then called the soul work of telling your story. And I think the soul work is important. It's not just a story, it's what comes from deep within. So that's the title and that's the book.
So we're in this new space of it's pouring, it's coming, it's a new story even comes out of the story you lived.
Exactly. It's my students, many of whom have been with me for quite a while, say, you know,
good afternoon, Allan Hunter. How are you?
It's delightful to see you, Lulu.
Same here, and I'm very happy to be talking today about how we can write our memoirs, how we can go beyond our ego to write memoirs, to really tap in this infinite wisdom that we have. And you just wrote a book to help people do that. You have over 30 years of actually teaching people how to do it, and this is not your first book. We spoke of many other ones before, but you're going to give us a few tips. Can you show us the cover? Because I know it's come out in a few days.
Here it is. This is the cover. Been a very helpful figure, but she didn't hand the loaded gun or the knife to this person. There was a bigger picture in which the writer himself had a responsibility that he didn't want to admit. And when he recognized that, he was able to do that soul work that we're talking about and say, what is my responsibility to others? How can I learn from this? What is the deep story? So that's what I do.
That seems very therapeutic to do, and even for people not wanting to publish it, I guess.
Yes. Well, again, you know, whether I wasn't intending to write about this, but this is what came out. I didn't think I could write, but here it is. It's the story telling you how it needs to be told. And that's the difference. It's not the writer writing a story. That's ego. It's the story telling the writer how the story needs to emerge so the real wisdom can be found, the real depth. And that, you see, is what most of us don't allow any time for, not even 15 minutes a day. It's a practice, like anything else. So that's at the heart of this book, And there are many other exercises that build in the same way.
So it's the soul that is guiding you and that is helping you write really what really happened. But it's hard to really remove yourself from this process.
Well, that's it. It's hard to. One person turned up in one of my classes and he said, I want to prove that my sister-in-law drove my brother to suicide. And I thought, whoa, you've already come to a conclusion before you've looked at the evidence. And as he was working, what he discovered was that the sister-in-law might not have